Kieran Cross woke up to the sound of metal tapping softly against glass. He blinked slowly. His body felt heavy, like it had been buried under wet cement. The lights above him were too bright and too blue, casting an unnatural glow across the sterile walls. This wasn't any hospital he knew. Another tap. He turned his head with effort. A large, translucent panel separated him from a creature standing just on the other side. Its skin shimmered greenish-gray, no eyes, just a smooth surface where a face should be. It tilted its head as it studied him, then tapped the glass again with a thin, three-jointed limb. Kieran tried to sit up, but a dull pressure in his left leg stopped him. He looked down. His leg below the knee was gone. He stared at the stump, wrapped in clean, synthetic gauze. The shock hit hard and fast, like falling through ice. His chest tightened, his breath caught in his throat. "Hey," he shouted, voice hoarse. "Where the hell am I?" The creature pressed a small device to its neck. A few seconds passed before a voice, mechanical and calm, came through a speaker embedded in the wall. "You are on medical vessel Erikstal under the jurisdiction of the Coalition of 14. You were retrieved from a crash site on Terran Moonbase Station Delta Gray. You had sustained terminal injuries to your lower extremities. Amputation was required to preserve life function." Kieran clenched his jaw and forced himself to breathe. "How long ago?" The voice paused. 17 Earth days." He closed his eyes. 17 days. That explained the dull ache and the strange numbness. Phantom limb pain. Real, tangible grief over something that wasn't even there anymore. How many other survivors? None. That single word cracked something in him, but he didn't let it show. Kieran looked back at the alien. "What's your name?" The creature shifted, then spoke through the translator. "I am called Itrax." Itrax stepped into the room through a seamless door. He moved silently, his body gliding more than walking. In his hands he held a data pad which he checked before speaking again. "You are awake sooner than projected. Your species' neural pathways process trauma irregularly." "Yeah, well, we're full of surprises," Kieran muttered. Itrax approached slowly and raised a limb to gesture at the stump. "Are you in pain?" "Some," Kieran admitted. "But I'll manage." Itrax hesitated. "Pain threshold in your species remains poorly understood. Records indicate extreme variance. Some humans enter shock under minimal trauma. Others," he glanced down, "resume activity beyond what is physiologically recommended." Kieran leaned back and laughed once bitterly. "You're not wrong." From that moment, Itrax became his primary observer, not quite a doctor, not quite a scientist, but always there. Every day, new tests, reflexes, neural response, muscular regeneration. Kieran wasn't allowed to walk yet, but they let him use crutches. The prosthetic hadn't been fitted yet. One morning, 2 weeks later, Itrax entered with a different tone to his movements. Hushed, cautious. "I must inform you," Itrax began. "We recently witnessed a human subject survive exposure to decompression for 42 seconds. It was presumed lethal." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "You're surprised? There is concern that your species' ability to function under injury is not only unpredictable but dangerous. Dangerous to who? To you. And to those around you. We cannot predict when you will fall. Or if you will fall at all." Kieran didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. "We don't always know either." He spent the next few days training slowly. The prosthetic was a hybrid part alien tech, part human design. It wasn't perfect, but it moved. It clicked into place with a smooth hiss and locked around his thigh. Itrax remained skeptical. "You are not ready for ambulation," Kieran exhaled sharply. "I'm not planning a marathon, but he did plan a jog." He waited until the observation lights shifted to the dimmer cycle, the closest thing the Erikstal had to a night. With slow, deliberate steps, he eased out of bed, attached the prosthetic, and stood. The first step was agony. Not sharp, not burning, just deep. It traveled up into his hip and spine and stayed there like a warning. He took another, then another. Eventually, he reached the hallway where the floor curved gently beneath him. The artificial gravity hummed faintly, just enough to give feedback. He picked up the pace. Jogging was a generous word. It was more of a shuffle at first, but he moved, sweat clung to his neck. Muscles in his back burned from the awkward motion. His body screamed to stop. He didn't. He made it halfway around the corridor before he collapsed against a wall, panting. The door behind him opened. Itrax stood there, silent. "You are in violation of your recovery protocol." Kieran gave a weak grin. "I was getting restless. You should not be capable of this level of motion." "Tell that to my body." Itrax moved closer, examining him. "You are in pain." "Of course I am." "Then why continue?" Kieran let his head rest against the wall. "Because if I don't push through it now, I'll never get back to normal, or whatever normal is going to be." Itrax stared at him, unmoving. "You risk permanent damage. Better than permanent fear." The alien said nothing after that. Instead, it helped him back to the medical bay. From then on, everything changed. More observers came in. Not just medical staff, psychologists, xenobiologists, researchers. They whispered among themselves as they watched Kieran train, sweat, stumble, curse, and get back up again. He was given clearance to use the artificial terrain room. The simulated environments varied by day: desert, tundra, forest, urban ruins. Kieran tackled them all, one by one. Some days he failed. Some days he couldn't even finish the warm-up, but he kept showing up. The worst was the ice simulation. The prosthetic didn't grip well. He fell hard, jarring his shoulder and bruising his ribs. Itrax found him lying on the ground, unmoving. "You are hurt." "Yeah," Kieran said through clenched teeth. "Think I cracked something? You should signal for assistance." "I wanted to see how far I could go." Itrax crouched beside him. "Your species' pain tolerance is not bravery, it is a biological risk." Kieran laughed softly. "Tell that to the first guy who climbed Everest with frostbite." "I do not understand." "You don't have to." Over the next 2 months his strength returned, slowly, realistically. The prosthetic was upgraded with better grip, better balance calibration. He learned to run again, truly run on a treadmill first, then on actual terrain. One day, without warning, the coalition's Central Council requested a demonstration. They had heard reports, some expressed concern, others curiosity. All wanted proof. Kieran was escorted into the central chamber. A domed space filled with representatives from 12 different species, each seated in floating arrays that pulsed with soft light. Itrax stood beside him. "You do not need to prove anything," Itrax said quietly. Kieran adjusted the strap on his prosthetic. "I'm not proving anything. I'm just showing them what we do." "What is that?" "We get back up." He stepped into the center and jogged, a full lap around the chamber. No limping, no stops, just steady, rhythmic motion. The room was silent. When he stopped, he turned to face them. "I'm not a soldier, I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who didn't want to let this break him. That's it." One of the council members leaned forward. "Why did you endure such discomfort when rest would have been more logical?" Kieran shrugged. "Because pain isn't the end. Sometimes it's just the beginning." Itrax watched him with something that might have been admiration or confusion, maybe both. Later that day, as Kieran walked alone through the observation deck, Itrax approached him again. "You have shifted the Council's understanding of human biology." "I didn't mean to, but you did. And now there is new fear, not of your violence, not of your weapons, but of your capacity to continue in spite of suffering." Kieran looked out at the stars beyond the glass. "That's not something we try to do, it's just how we survive." Itrax nodded slowly. "I believe I understand. Pain for you is not a barrier, it is a measure." Kieran chuckled. "Something like that." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. He had already run the hardest race. Not in front of a council, not on a treadmill, but in the quiet moments, the ones no one saw, when he had to decide whether he was going to get up again, and he did. Every time. The artificial rain in the biome lab smelled faintly metallic, like someone had tried too hard to mimic Earth and missed by a hair. Kieran sat on a low bench beneath a transparent canopy, his synthetic leg crossed over his knee. The humidity clung to his skin, but he didn't mind. It was the closest thing he'd had to weather in weeks. Across from him, Itrax stood motionless, his surface shifting subtly in color. Behind him, a group of observers, 4 tall, thin beings with translucent torsos and no visible mouths, watched from behind a partition. Their bodies pulsed with slow ripples of light, a language Kieran hadn't even tried to learn. "You understand they're not here to congratulate you," Itrax said. Kieran leaned back. "I figured. They look like angry lava lamps. They are members of the Velen sympathate. Their species does not display anger." "Then I stand corrected. They look like deeply disappointed lava lamps." Itrax didn't respond. Instead, he moved closer and extended a thin tool toward Kieran's leg. It beeped softly as it scanned the attachment point. "There is strain in the lateral actuator. Have you been adjusting the tension manually?" "I nudged it 2 notches last night." "It was pulling a little on the uphill incline. You are not authorized to modify the unit without supervision." "Well, I wasn't authorized to test it on moss-covered climbing walls either, but here we are." Itrax turned his head slightly. "You scaled the simulation wall, mostly. Slid down the last third. That's why I made the adjustment." Itrax paused. "The wall is not meant for bipedal traversal. Neither is a mountain in Peru, but people still hike it." Behind the partition, one of the Velen blinked its whole body in a rapid strobe of orange. Itrax glanced at the flash, then back to Kieran. "They are concerned you are attempting to prove superiority." Kieran scratched his neck where the humidity had started to itch. "They're reading it wrong. I'm just trying to prove I'm functional." "There's a difference. They do not perceive failure as something to recover from. In their culture, it is a final state. That's bleak. They consider your continued activity an act of rebellion against natural outcome." Kieran laughed. "So surviving makes me a rebel now? In this context, yes." He stood and walked a small circle, testing the leg again. The actuator still clicked faintly on the push-off, but it wasn't locking up anymore. The new alignment had helped. "Tell the lava lamps they're welcome to try a jog on this thing," he said. "They do not possess legs. Then they're missing out." The canopy retracted with a soft whir and the artificial rain ended. A thin mist remained in the air, clinging to Kieran's shirt. He rubbed at his neck again. "I need real moisture cream," he muttered. "The compound we provided simulates hydration. It simulates being dipped in glue." Itrax gestured toward the exit. "We have permission to visit the auxiliary exchange. There are human-compatible supplies available." Kieran raised an eyebrow. "You're taking me shopping." "It is an observation mission." They walked slowly through the corridor. The Erextal's interior had no hard edges, only curves and gradients. Everything glowed faintly, like the ship couldn't decide if it was asleep or awake. Kieran tapped his fingers against the wall as they passed. It vibrated gently, responding to touch not enough to be useful, but enough to feel strange. At the exchange chamber, 3 alien vendors floated behind a semicircular counter. Each one looked like it had been carved from molten crystal mid-pour. Kieran instinctively kept his hands in his pockets. Itrax approached the first stall and exchanged a series of quick pulses with the vendor. The vendor responded by lowering a tray filled with translucent tubes. "You may select 2, Itrax said. Kieran inspected the tubes. "Why 2? Regulations." He picked up a blue one and sniffed it. The scent was sharp and vaguely minty. The second smelled like damp clay. He set it back down. "All right, mystery gel and minty regret." "Let's go." They left the chamber and turned down a hallway Kieran hadn't seen before. It sloped downward, deeper into the vessel. The air cooled as they moved. "This isn't the way back to the biome," he said. "I requested a deviation." "Why?" "There is someone who wishes to speak with you." They reached a circular chamber with a high ceiling. In its center floated a being unlike any Kieran had seen, broad, with layers of overlapping chitin that shifted color as it moved. 6 limbs, 3 eyes, and a voice that came from deep inside its chest, like gravel in a drum. "You are the human," it said. Kieran nodded. "That's me. I have reviewed your data. You continue to exert force through a limb that is not alive. It's artificial." "Yes." "And yet you treat it as if it were not." Because it's mine now, the creature approached. Why not wait? Why not allow healing to complete before re-engaging function? I'd lose too much ground. Ground is only lost if you believe yourself to be in a race. Kieran met its gaze or tried to. I'm not racing anyone, I just don't like staying still. The creature tilted its head. Your pain readings remained high even during motion. You did not slow. This is not logic. This is compulsion. I won't argue with that. Is it your species' nature to continue through suffering without pause? Not everyone, but enough of us. The creature turned toward Itrax. He should not be underestimated. His behavior may be anomalous, but it is consistent. Itrax said nothing. The creature turned back to Kieran. You are no longer being monitored for instability. Was I being monitored for that? Yes. Glad to hear I passed the exam. You did not pass. You changed the questions. 3 days later, Kieran stood in the terrain dome again. This time it was set to simulate uneven volcanic rock, black, porous, and hot underfoot. The prosthetic foot gripped poorly here too, but he was learning to compensate. Small steps, angled pressure, let the heel rotate just enough to stabilize. Itrax watched from a distance. No notepad, no scanner, just observing. You're not taking notes, Kieran called out. I already know what you'll do. That's a dangerous assumption. You'll adapt. Kieran stopped to wipe his forehead. I think my residual limb's getting inflamed. There's some pressure on the fibular head. Do you require intervention? Not yet. I'll adjust the socket angle later. Itrax moved closer. You are modifying your own equipment again. I know my body better than anyone else does. You are not a prosthetics engineer. No, but I am the one wearing it. Itrax looked down at the leg. There is a disconnect in our understanding. We view external augmentation as separate. You view it as integrated. Kieran nodded. Because if we don't, we never get back to living. That night, Kieran sat alone in his quarters, foot propped up, the liner of his prosthesis peeled away. The skin around the stump was red, slightly swollen. He ran a clean cloth over it, wincing. He didn't call for help. Instead, he adjusted the angle of the pylon by 3 degrees, tightened the sleeve, and stood. The pain shot up his thigh. He waited for it to settle. Then he walked to the window and watched the stars drift past. On the far side of the ship, the Velen Council recorded their updated findings. Subject continues to engage in activity inconsistent with expected pain response behavior. Subject modifies equipment with minimal guidance, demonstrating both risk tolerance and autonomy. Conclusion: human pain thresholds are not merely biological, they are cultural, psychological, and volitional. They submitted the report without debate. Back in the biome, Itrax reviewed the data from Kieran's last run. Time was improving. Gait was stabilizing, pressure distribution still uneven but compensating well. He closed the file. Then, without prompting, he walked to the terrain dome and reset the environment. This time to a slope of fine gravel. He wanted to see what Kieran would do next. The gravel slope was worse than anything Kieran had run on before. It shifted under every step, sliding just enough to throw off his balance without warning. He caught himself with his arms more than once, palms scraped and sore. The prosthetic didn't like the terrain too fine, too unstable. Each time the foot sank, it locked at the wrong angle, and he had to reset his stride mid-motion. Itrax stood at the far edge of the dome, arms folded in a way that didn't seem natural for his species. He didn't interfere. He didn't take notes either. Kieran gritted his teeth and pushed forward, every muscle in his torso working overtime to stabilize. He stumbled again, hit the ground hard, and rolled onto his side, gravel digging into exposed skin. He stayed there for a moment, breathing. The door to the dome hissed open. A new alien entered, tall and narrow, with overlapping plates that clicked softly as it moved. Kieran had seen its kind once before in the observation wing, but never this close. It stopped beside Itrax without a word. Kieran sat up. Didn't realize this was a spectator sport. The new alien's voice vibrated in its chest before the translator kicked in. We are verifying a claim. That you continue movement with full awareness of structural inefficiency. Inefficiency's just a fancy way of saying I'm not great at walking on marbles, Kieran said. He stood slowly, brushing grit from his arms. But yeah, I know it's not ideal, you persist. Because that's the point. Itrax stepped forward, still watching Kieran's posture. The socket is not maintaining suspension, you are compensating through your spine. Yeah, I've been feeling that. Pelvic tilts off. You will injure yourself. I'll rest after I figure out how to stabilize the foot on descent. I keep losing grip halfway down. The tall alien stepped closer to the slope. The simulation was designed to highlight instability. No species in the coalition uses this terrain for testing. Kieran started down again, slower this time, adjusting pressure with every step. His leg burned in the way overused tissue does not sharp, but insistent. He reached the bottom without falling and turned around. Then you're all missing out. They didn't laugh. He hadn't expected them to. Later that cycle, Kieran sat inside the maintenance bay with his prosthesis detached. The sleeve had developed a slight tear at the edge, and he was applying a patch with slow, careful pressure. The material didn't take well to adhesives, so he had to warm it first with a low-heat tool Itrax had reluctantly provided. The door opened with a soft chime. No footsteps followed. He didn't look up. What's the verdict? Still a walking anomaly, Itrax moved closer and sat on the elevated bench opposite him. The observers have finished their assessment. They will not request additional simulations. Kieran glanced at him. Because they're satisfied. Because they are confused, he nodded slowly. Sounds about right. They do not understand why you continue to exert force through malfunction. It's not malfunction, it's just not perfect. There is a distinction. Yeah, malfunction means it doesn't work. This just means it's hard. Itrax tilted his head. They do not perceive effort as neutral. For them, difficulty indicates failure. Kieran peeled back part of the liner to recheck the adhesive. That's not how we see it. If it's hard and you still do it, that means it matters. Itrax was silent for a moment. Then, you require a new alignment tool. This one is not calibrated for your current gait. Kieran reached into the pouch beside him and held up a modified wrench with a cracked grip. I already made adjustments. It's functional, you crafted your own tool, didn't have much choice. Itrax took the wrench, turned it over and scanned it with a handheld device. This design is unstable, it could shear under torque. I used what fit the bolt heads. The others were too narrow. You could have requested assistance. I figured you had your hands full convincing the lava lamps I'm not a threat. Itrax looked at him, unblinking. They no longer believe you are dangerous, they believe you are. Unpredictable, Kieran smirked, then stopped himself. Better than useless, I guess. He slid the prosthetic back on, guiding the liner into place with both hands. The seal hissed slightly as it engaged. Itrax watched the process. Your alignment is improving despite poor equipment. But your residual limb is showing signs of pressure damage. You will develop bursa if you continue. Already feel one forming near the distal end. I've been patting it. You require rest. I will, just not yet. Itrax stood. The council has agreed to release you from monitoring protocols. You may return to your species enclave once transport is available, Kieran nodded. Good, I've got people to find. Itrax hesitated. There is no record of living contacts from your station. I meant new people. Somewhere out there. They stood in silence for a moment, then Itrax picked up the modified wrench again. You should leave this behind, it is not safe. Kieran shook his head. I'll take my chances. 3 days later, he stood at the departure bay. The transport shuttle was smaller than he expected, with only 2 seats and no atmosphere buffer. The pilot was another alien he didn't recognize, all limbs and no visible joints. Itrax accompanied him as far as the threshold. You have refused further prosthetic upgrades. I don't need another feature I won't use. I've got what works. You could improve efficiency, maybe, but I'd rather improve control. Itrax looked at the leg one last time. You have altered more than your body. Kieran smiled faintly. So have you. He stepped into the shuttle without limping. The seal closed behind him and the engines hummed to life. The ship lifted gently, then accelerated away from the Erextol. Inside, the pilot said nothing. Kieran looked out the small window at the stars. The leg ached. His back ached. The spot behind his right shoulder blade was already twitching from overuse. But he was moving. When the ship reached cruising speed, he pulled out the patched alignment tool. Just to check the tension. Just to feel the click of something being made slightly better by his hands. The pain was still there. It always would be. But that wasn't the point. The point was getting up again and again until forward became the only direction that made sense.